Racism, as both a belief system and a social construct, has plagued human societies for centuries, creating divides that have led to conflict, oppression, and suffering. Despite the historical prevalence of racist ideologies, a growing body of scientific evidence demonstrates that there is no biological foundation for racism. The human species as a whole is fundamentally more like than it is different. To begin with, it is crucial to clarify what race means in a sociological and biological context. Scientifically speaking, the concept of race has been deemed a social construct rather than a biologically valid classification. While people may categorize themselves and others based on physical characteristics such as skin color, hair type, and facial features, these traits represent a tiny fraction of our genetic makeup. The Human Genome Project, a landmark scientific endeavor completed in 2003, mapped the entire human genome and ultimately revealed that humans share approximately 99.9% of their DNA. This staggering fact underscores the argument that racial distinctions based on superficial characters lack scientific credibility. The genetic variations that do occur within the human population are not neatly divided along racial lines. For instance, genetic diversity is often greater within so called racial groups than between them. Investigations into human genetics reveal that the majority of genetic variation can be found within populations rather than between them. For example, a study comparing genetic variations in various populations throughout Africa, a region with immense genetic diversity, demonstrated that any two individuals from the same community could be more genetically different than two individuals from distinct communities on different continents. This evidence calls into question the validity of race as a meaningful scientific classification. Racism refers to the belief that certain races are inherently superior or inferior to others, which is fundamentally flawed when analyzed through a scientific lens. The disparity in societal outcomes, economic status, and education levels among different racial groups is often misconstrued as evidence of innate differences. However, these outcomes are largely attributable to historical socioeconomic factors, systemic injustices, and unequal access to resources rather than any intrinsic capabilities or traits linked to race. Racism has existed in various forms throughout human history, including in ancient civilizations such as India, China, Pharaonic Africa, the Arab world, and the Ottoman Empire. In ancient India, caste systems entrenched social stratification, often leading to discrimination based on ethnicity and occupation. Similarly, ancient Chinese study exhibited xenophobia, viewing non-Han ethnic groups as inferior. In Pharaonic Africa, slight enslavement in Egypt existed and they imposed harsh conditions on the slave population. In the Arab world, pre-Islamic attitudes also reflected racial hierarchies through the advent of Islamic thought to promote equality. The Ottoman Empire, while ethnically diverse, had distinct social classes that sometimes fostered prejudice against non Turkish groups. The roots of racism can be traced back to ancient civilizations, where distinctions between people, often based on ethnicity or territory, led to discrimination and subjugation. However, it was during the age of European colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade that modern racial concepts were crystallized. Racial hierarchies were established with the European supremacy positioned at the apex, justifying the oppression and exploitation of African, indigenous, and other non European peoples. Racial characterization emerged notably during the age of colonialism, when Europeans sought to justify the subjugation of other peoples. The subsequent development of pseudo-scientific theories like eugenics attempted to articulate racial hierarchies and endorse discriminatory policies, despite lacking a basis in sound science. These ideologies thrived through misinterpretations of biology and anthropology, with race concocted as a means to rationalize and perpetuate inequality. The legacy of these historical injustices continues to resonate today as systemic structures were built on the premise of racial superiority and inferiority. Laws, economic systems, and cultural narratives have all been shaped by history that favored some groups while marginalizing others. Consequently, the ingrained prejudices that arose from these colonial practices continue to influence contemporary social dynamics. Racism is a socially constructed concept that serves various political purposes. It has been leveraged by individuals and groups throughout history to maintain power, control resources, and justify discriminatory practices. Political entities may manipulate racial illusions to galvanize support or distract from systemic issues, employing rhetoric that foster animosity among different racial or ethnic groups. This politically motivated use of racism can perpetuate inequalities and hinder social cohesion, highlighting the need for critical examination of how such narratives are employed in political discourse. The persistence of racism in contemporary society can be partially attributed to socio-cultural factors, including stereotypes and prejudices that are deeply embedded in societal norms and institutions. Socialization often contributes to the internalization of racial biases leading to the reinforcement of harmful stereotypes about certain groups. Moreover, structural inequalities, and systemic racism perpetuate disparities across multiple dimensions, such as health, education, and employment. This cycle of disadvantage fosters an environment where racial stereotypes are perpetuated, leading to an erroneous perception of inherent differences. The overwhelming evidence from genetics and anthropology reveals that the concept of race is a social construct with no biological validity. The similarities among humans far outweigh the superficial differences, showcasing the unity of the human species. The historical roots of racism and the socio-cultural factors that sustain it highlight the necessity for continual education and awareness. By embracing a scientifically grounded understanding of humanity, society can move towards dismantling the barriers created by racism and foster a more inclusive, equitable future. The path forward lies in recognizing our shared humanity and working correctly to eradicate the biases and injustices that have long divided us. Racism is a social construct mainly used as a political tool. Scientifically, there is only one unified human race.